If you're on TikTok, you probably saw the video of the man who went to Home Depot and then got into a scuffle, or not. I guess it wasn't Home Depot. I guess it was one of the two, right? One of the either Lowe's or Home Depot. He went there and he got into kind of a scuffle with one of the employees who didn't want to help one of the elderly patron that was there, and so he got into kind of a bit of trouble with us. Well, I saw this and I'm like, okay, I get the story and I understand it, but what I look at it from a teaching perspective is, what can we learn from this? Now, I'm not judging anybody in this whole thing, whether the protagonist or antagonist, and I realize that by breaking this down, I'm going to be robbing a lot of the, I'm going to be taking a lot of the piss and vinegar out of the video and the whole situation. But I'm going to give you an analysis of this and how we could avoid something like this in the future. And this has nothing to do with whether or not I think anybody was right or wrong. It really doesn't. I look at this from a financial standpoint. We have a generation of young people that have been lied to such a degree, and they don't really know how to handle the reality that exists. Now, I say this as a Gen Xer, right? I knew all this stuff was a lie because I remember seeing how boomers lived. And so, and any Gen Xer will tell you this, right? I mean, like every Xer I know will tell you this story about how they were told to go to college and all that kind of stuff. And some guys did. Some guys did go do all that, but they didn't take on anywhere near the same type of debt that young people are taking on now and have been for the last probably 20 years. There's that. But also, the industries hadn't been offshored to the extent that they have now. So nobody wakes up in the morning, or most people, I would say, don't wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I want to go work for a giant mega corporation, like one of the home hardware store places, okay, without saying the names, and for very low wages, for like $15 an hour, and be treated terribly, and be just another part of the unwashed masses. Nobody wakes up and does that when they're a kid, right? What do they say when they're younger? I want to do something important, or something that seems important, and that's what I'm after. So a lot of people who work at these places, they're there because that's who was hiring, right? That's why they're there. They're there because they're willing to hire them, and it's a way station. It's a stopping point, and that they're in the hopes that they will get hired into some other better job, that they'll kind of win a lottery and they'll get hired into a so-called better job. Now, so this doesn't excuse the behavior. Okay, don't misunderstand. I'm not excusing the behavior of our antagonist in the story. I'm pointing out, though, that this is predictable behavior that you get when you lie to, well, now coming up on 3 generations of young people about how they're going to be able to do exotic sounding jobs that seem important and that seem, that are super satisfying, right? Because, the reason that you work is to make money to go do the stuff that you want to do, right? But if all of a sudden you're not being paid enough money to go do anything that you want to do, well, then you pretty much check out mentally. This happened in the Soviet system, and I know I've said this before. I sound like a broken record when I say this kind of stuff, but it's true, because this is what happened. People check out mentally. This across all sectors. They just go, man, I mean, like, this isn't what I wanted to do, and they're right. It doesn't excuse the behavior. Don't misunderstand. Please don't read anything into this that I'm like excusing any of this. I'm not. He should have gone and helped the elderly gentleman. He should have. But understand that is just going to get worse. Now, how could this have been avoided? Okay, well, now we get into the meat and potatoes. Well, the first thing you would do is you get in a time machine and you would go back to the 70s, and you would not create a bunch of tax laws that forced people to putting their money into the stock market, creating these behemoth companies like you did. You would have a bunch of small hardware stores. So, for example, the hardware store that I go to, whenever practicable, is a small locally owned hardware store. I don't want to say the name because of where I am and everything, but I mean, everybody in the area knows who it is. And they are a very helpful little hardware store. They're not one of the mega chains at all. But The reason they can stay open is because if you hearken back to about 5 or 6 videos ago or so that I did, the owner has owned that property since the 70s, I want to say. I mean, I mean, he's long retired. It's his kids that own it now. But they own that property. So therefore, their prices are able to stay in check, okay? They're able to be somewhat competitive because they're not constantly having to, pay these increased, ridiculous lease rates that the commercial jackals want. As a result of that, when we could have avoided this whole thing by not having these giant mega companies, right? You'd have small, locally owned, and the people who work there are people who want to be there, right? And small businesses, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, small businesses understand that they have to pay, they want to be able to keep people there, because a small business doesn't have the money to keep retraining people over and over and over and over and over. So they want to compensate enough to keep good people on staff. And then also, let's say that situation happened at a small business. That exact same situation, let's say that happened in a small business. Well, first of all, there wouldn't have been a self-checkout, for starters, right there. Okay, most small businesses don't do that. But there wouldn't have been that. The next thing that would have happened is that the owner would have shown up and said, hey, well, what's all this? And like, what do you mean my employee didn't want to help this elderly gentleman? I mean, they'd be fired instantly, right? There wouldn't be any bureaucracy. There wouldn't be going through all kinds of hearings and what have you. It wouldn't be any of that. It would, the employee would just be straight fired, right? And probably on the spot. So that's kind of how I look at these kinds of situations. These are tragic situations in my mind, because all of this is avoidable if you allow all these companies to fail. All these giant mega companies, if you just let them fail, stop bailing these institutions out. I realize that in doing so, that the stock market would collapse and a bunch of people would lose pretty much everything. I get that, but it says right there, you signed an agreement. And every 401k, every IRA, every retirement plan you've ever had, it says right there, you agree to lose all your money. It usually says it in bold, underlined, italicized, all caps. It'll say, you've agreed to lose all of your money if we lose it for you. That's what it says. I mean, what's that Wolf of Wall Street movie that everybody's seen, where there's that McConaughey character who's explaining, like, dude, who cares about the client? Who gives a shit what happens to the client? Our job is to make a bunch of money. That's what we give a shit about. We don't give a fuck about the client. We don't care if they make money. Hey, if they make money, that's great for them, but we don't give a shit. That's really what's happened, is that a bunch of people got put into this. It created these giant behemoth companies that shouldn't have existed in the first place. And then, of course, what happens is that you also get a younger generation that start to understand how important it is to actually own small businesses and why those are so vital to your economy. And that's the part that's being missing, right? And I don't mean just a small business as in trying to be an influencer. I saw that other video that there was a young lady put out, that it was a great video, where she's trying to do a PSA to everybody who's like trying to make millions of dollars as an influencer. It's probably not going to happen. Well, no, the market is so insanely flooded. I was shocked when I had more than 100 followers. That blew my mind that I had 100 people that would follow anything I would say. And so, let alone thousands that now follow me across platforms. So between TikTok and Twitter and YouTube and what have you, I'm stunned that anybody would tune in. But I'm just telling you, I have no illusions of trying to make big piles of money off of anybody. I know most people don't have money. I don't have any t-shirts to sell you. I don't have any coffee mugs. I'm not picking on that. I'm just saying I'm not really after your money. I just want people to understand some of this stuff so that they understand going forward that as this continues to degenerate, and it will, this is a degenerative situation in the country, you understand why it's happening, and so that hopefully we don't do this shit again. Fair enough?